The date was November 25th, 1177. The sun was a white-hot hammer beating down on the limestone hills of Palestine. Across the rolling dunes of the coastal plain, 26,000 professional warriors moved with the quiet confidence of hunters. This was the grand army of Saladin, the most powerful leader in the Islamic world. He had spent years unifying Egypt and Syria, and now he was coming for the ultimate prize, Jerusalem. To Saladin, the defense of the Holy Land was a joke. The king of Jerusalem was a boy, a 16-year-old named Baldwin IV. But Baldwin was not just a boy, he was a leper. His flesh was decaying, his right arm was paralyzed, and he was expected to be dead within months. Saladin was so confident in his victory that he did not even bother to keep his army together. He allowed his troops to scatter across the countryside to loot and burn, believing the boy king was trapped and helpless inside the fortress of Ascalon. It was the greatest mistake of Saladin's career. Hidden in the dust and the heat, the dying king was preparing a counterstrike that would defy every law of probability. Within hours, the greatest general of the age would find himself running for his life from a teenager on a white horse. Today, we analyze the Battle of Montgisard, where 500 knights shattered an empire of 26,000 and proved that a dying king can be the most dangerous man on the battlefield. To understand why Montgisard became a graveyard for Saladin's ambitions, you have to grasp the two military systems that were about to collide. The Ayyubid war machine under Saladin was built for endurance, mobility, and attrition. Saladin did not rely on a single heavy blow. His strength was his ability to absorb losses and strike back with light cavalry and horse archers. His elite guard, the Mamluks, were professional slave warriors who could fire arrows with lethal precision while galloping at full speed. Saladin's strategy was to stretch the Crusaders thin, wear them down under the desert sun, and then use his superior numbers to envelop and crush them. By late 1177, he believed he had already won. He had bypassed the main Crusader fortresses and was marching directly toward the heart of the kingdom. He saw the Crusaders as a spent force, a collection of panicked defenders hiding behind stone walls. The Crusader system represented the peak of heavy shock cavalry. The centerpiece of their power was the Frankish knight. These were men encased in iron mail, riding massive war horses bred for power and impact. Their entire tactical existence was focused on a single devastating moment, the charge. A line of knights moving at full speed was the medieval equivalent of a kinetic missile. If they could hit a target in a synchronized line, they could break almost any formation. But they had a fatal weakness. They were few in number. Their armor made them slow and vulnerable to heat exhaustion. In the open desert, they were usually picked apart by horse archers before they could ever get close enough to strike. But at Montgisard, the Crusaders possessed a secret weapon that no general could account for. The sheer, desperate willpower of a king who knew he had nothing left to lose. Baldwin IV was a medical miracle and a psychological titan. Chroniclers tell us that as a child, his tutor William of Tyre noticed that Baldwin did not cry when other children pinched his arms during play. The boy felt no pain because the nerves in his limbs were already dying. By age 16, his condition was horrific. He could not use his right hand to hold a sword or a bridle. He had to be helped onto his horse. His face was often covered by a veil or a mask to hide the sores of his disease. Most leaders would have stayed in the palace, waiting for the end. But Baldwin possessed a religious and personal conviction that his life was a sacrifice for the defense of Jerusalem. When news reached him that Saladin was burning the villages near the coast, Baldwin did not hide. He summoned every man who could hold a spear. He managed to gather about 375 to 500 knights, including 80 elite knights, Templar led by the fierce Odu de Saint-Amand. Along with a few thousand local infantry, they began a desperate, high-speed chase through the desert to catch the shadow of Saladin's massive column. The strategic situation on the morning of November 25th was a masterclass in hubris and surprise. Saladin's army was strung out over miles of road near the hill of Montgisard. They were crossing a narrow ravine, a difficult terrain feature that slowed down their movement. Because Saladin believed Baldwin was miles away in the south, he had not set up proper scouts or a defensive perimeter. His men were relaxed. Many had even taken off their armor to deal with the heat. Their horses were unburdened, and their weapons were packed away. They were not an army at that moment. They were a massive, disorganized caravan of looters. That is when the horizon exploded. Baldwin and his 500 knights appeared on the ridge overlooking the ravine. The sight was terrifying. In the center of the Crusader line, the Bishop of Beth Lahem raised the true cross, a relic encased in gold and jewels that the Crusaders believed was the actual wood from the crucifixion of Christ. Baldwin, the dying boy king, slid off his horse. He knelt in the sand before the cross, his hands wrapped in bandages, and prayed for a miracle. His soldiers, seeing their crippled king prostrated in the dust, were overcome by a wave of religious hysteria. They didn't just see a battle, they saw a holy execution. Baldwin was helped back into his saddle, his reins tied to his paralyzed arm so he could steer his horse. He raised his sword with his left hand and gave the order. The charge at Montgisard was one of the most effective in the history of warfare. The 500 knights did not attack in a loose group. They hit the center of Saladin's line like a single, iron fist. Because the Ayyubid army was caught in the ravine, they had no room to maneuver. Their light cavalry could not use their speed to escape. The knights crashed into the unarmored ranks of the Mamluks and the infantry. The sound was like a forest being chopped down. Steel blades carved through leather and flesh. The momentum of the heavy horses carried the Crusaders deep into the heart of the enemy camp. Saladin, who was in the center of the column, was nearly killed in the first minutes. His elite Mamluk guard tried to form a circle around him, but they were cut down by the Templars, who fought with a suicidal ferocity. Odu de Saint-Amand led the Templars with a bloodlust that shocked even the veteran Egyptian commanders. The Crusaders were outnumbered 50-1, but in the narrow confines of the ravine, only the front ranks mattered. And in the front ranks, the ironclad knights were invincible. The panic that swept through Saladin's army was total. Seeing their godlike general nearly captured and their comrades slaughtered, the 26,000 warriors turned and fled. But the desert was not a friend to the retreating. A cold rain began to fall, turning the dust into a slick, treacherous mud. Baldwin, despite his exhaustion and his disease, refused to stop. He led his cavalry in a pursuit that lasted for miles. The Crusaders hunted the scattered remnants of the Egyptian army through the night. Saladin himself only escaped by mounting a fast-racing camel and riding for his life. He fled across the Sinai Desert, arriving back in Cairo with only a fraction of his force. He had lost his baggage train, his gold, and his reputation as an invincible conqueror. For the first and only time in his life, Saladin had been completely outplayed by a child. The strategic implications of Montgisard were profound. The victory saved the Kingdom of Jerusalem for another 10 years. It proved that the Crusader states were not dead yet, and it forced Saladin to spend years rebuilding his military and his political prestige. But the psychological impact was even greater. The story of the Leper king who defeated the great Saladin became a legend that echoed from London to Baghdad. It was a moment where the physical frailty of a leader was transformed into a source of supernatural strength. Baldwin IV had identified the one moment when Saladin's system was vulnerable, the moment of overconfidence. He had used the terrain of Montgisard to nullify the enemy's numbers, and used the religious symbols of his office to trigger a fanatical morale in his men. What makes Montgisard different from other Crusader victories was the role of the king's personal struggle. Baldwin was fighting two wars at once, one against the invaders and one against his own body. His presence on the field was a message to his men that if a man who could not feel his own limbs could charge into the mouth of hell, then they had no excuse for cowardice. It was a victory of the spirit over the flesh. Saladin would eventually return. He would eventually win at the Battle of Hattin 10 years later. But he would never forget the boy who taught him that numbers mean nothing if the heart of the commander is hollow. The impossible defeat at Montgisard remains a masterclass in the power of shock and surprise. It serves as a reminder that in warfare, the most dangerous opponent is the one who has already accepted his own death. Baldwin IV was a king who was already in his grave, yet he managed to stand tall enough to cast a shadow over the greatest empire of his time. He was the Leper King, the boy who held back the tide of history with a paralyzed arm and an iron will. It was the day tactical genius and religious desperation turned a certain massacre into a miraculous triumph. If you want to see how this victory shaped the Third Crusade and the legendary rivalry between Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, watch this next video. Subscribe for more battles where brilliant strategy changed the course of history.